So before we get started with our programming for tonight, happy Veterans Day today across the country. So we announced something that I personally am very excited about. American Legion 0917, the post here in New York City, and PubKey are teaming up to host the American Legion outpost here in New York City. We have Mike and Michael. If you want to say a few words, you're welcome to. You don't have to. We can talk about some of the stuff that we're going to have come together between PubKey and the American Legion. So everybody, warm round of applause for Michael.
Hello. Hello. Yes. Happy Veterans Day, everyone. My name is Mike Munoz. I am the founding post commander of Post 0917, the first American Legion post chartered in New York State in over a decade. I want to give a big thank you to Thomas for giving us our first home here at PubKey. And basically, our American Legion post is going to be is a home for post 9/11 veterans, and we're taking the modern approach. First, by partnering with Thomas and PubKey, and we'll be hosting great events, and we'll be a home for veterans. And do you want to say anything?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Matos. I'm the first vice commander. I'm a 10-year Coast Guard vet. Real quick, do we have any other veterans here? Raise your hands. What brand, sir?
Marine.
Semper Fi.
Happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday yesterday. So to piggyback off what Mike was saying was that this is the first post that's been created in over 10 years in New York City, so it's a big deal. And then we're also trying to change the approach to the American Legion, at least here in New York City, to where we're welcoming the new generation of veterans, so the post 9/11 folks, and also setting up for tomorrow's legacy. This is why talking with PubKey and having this partnership is so important, because as we all know here, crypto is the next big thing. We want to educate our folks about how this all works, get them excited about it, and then also making sure that we're bringing in folks from all around the country, all backgrounds and stuff like that, making sure they feel welcome and having a solid home here in New York City. So thank you for PubKey for the partnership. We're looking forward to it, and yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We got a lot of Bitcoin veterans, especially those Army Ops guys. They have a way of finding their path to Bitcoin miners. They like Army Ops in the mining industry. On to the main event. Peter Todd, welcome to PubKey. Big round of applause for the Bitcoin contributor. Satoshi Nakamoto, maybe? Question mark.
We'll get into it.
Pete Rizzo, of course, from Bitcoin Magazine. Welcome, guys.
Welcome, Peter Todd.
Thank you.
Pete Rizzo again, editor at Bitcoin Magazine. Happy all-time highs. How's everybody doing? Let's give the Bitcoin price a round of applause. What are we at? We're at 88,000? 89,000, wow. We're going to pass 100K. I think Peter Todd's going to drop some serious alpha. So I think everybody pay attention. What are we going to do tonight? So I think we're going to do a little bit of a light program. We're definitely going to talk about the all-time highs a little bit. We're going to talk about the HBO documentary, which I'm sure many of you have questions about. We're going to get into Peter's real history, not the history you might know from television, what actually kind of happened, and probably what he sees about the future of Bitcoin. People are always picking his brains about the future of Bitcoin. So we'll get. Oh, and thank you. And that chair will not be joining us. Goodbye, chair. Yeah, thank you. Really wasn't great. We can more comfortable.
Well, I mean, that
here.
was for Satoshi, in case you.
All right, R.I.P. Pour one out. Tip your bartenders. Let's get into the HBO documentary. Let's start with that. This was the name of it was The Hunt for Satoshi. No, I'm just kidding. What was the name of it? Does anybody remember? Money Electric. Okay. Okay, so a lot of people might be familiar with you as the unknowing star of that. So why don't you take us all the way back?
All the way back.
Well, hey.
Yeah.
How did you get the call from HBO? What was happening? I mean, imagine you get calls from lots of big places.
It wasn't a call.
It wasn't
In
a
fact,
call.
I'm not sure I actually have Cullen's contact info, come to think of it. I'm not sure I do.
Do you know that he exists? Like, do you know that he is Cullen Hoback?
I mean, I assume he's actually Satoshi Nakamoto and just going to deep cover.
Right.
You know,
okay.
what was he really doing in 2008? Like, come
Right.
on.
You should have turned it on him on there. But okay,
Yeah,
so you get you get the email, like somebody approaches you.
No, I
Like,
mean,
what-
I think
okay.
it was.
You just showed up and someone
I
had
could
a-
be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it was at like Bitcoin Riga or something, and literally some dudes with a whole lot of camera equipment. I mean, dudes with camera equipment approached me
They
a
just
lot.
follow you all
but
over
this
the
was
place,
a
yeah.
lot of camera equipment.
Like
you
so,
know,
they're just several of them.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, well, I
carrying-
mean,
okay.
notably, the guy had not just cameras, but like a guy with cameras.
So this was like high definition. You've never
Yeah.
been shot in this resolution.
Well,
before,
I
right?
mean,
that
This
we
is-
know of.
This is the fourth thing I've had contact with mainstream media about.
Mm-hmm.
So this happened to me a few times. But, you know, he shows up at this conference. He's got his cameraman with him, and then some woman, like, actually recording sound. So he's got
Okay.
the trifecta.
Did you
know?
get hair and makeup done? That's how you know it's a.
Well, I mean, it was authentic, obviously.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
really real.
But, you know, he contacted me. I said, oh, I mean, I'll go talk to you, whatever. And the impression I got was it's just some, you know, documentary filmmaker making a documentary
So
about the rise
did
of
they
Bitcoin.
talk to you about what it was about? They didn't.
Not
say,
really. I mean, they a little bit, but, you know, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, I was doing this thing about Bitcoin, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And they talked about, like, Bitcoin stuff, you know, some tech stuff, some of the history of it, whatever. But notably, you know, this was sort of a walk and talk at the conference. And,
Do you remember what year this was? What year are we talking about?
well, 2024, 2023, it was probably 2022, I
So this goes back a ways.
Yeah, yeah. It was like this was sort of over like for me at least over 3 years.
Oh wow.
So
okay.
you know he does this at Bitcoin Riga I think 2022. I may be wrong with this. I could double check photos on my phone. But anyway, he does all this, and then he goes and says basically, well, obviously, you know, we don't really want to go do the documentary here because this is boring. This is like outside of a conference with a parking lot in the background. Who's going to do that? So why don't we go and find a better place to go film? And we kind of talked a bit about it, and he suggested, among other things, well, you know, we could take you to this pottery studio. You could maybe make some pots or whatever. And it's like, okay. I've actually done this in high school. I'm pretty good at pottery.
He's an art school graduate.
Yeah, I am actually an art school grad.
Fun fact about
Yeah.
Peter Todd,
And-
art school graduate.
You know, that still didn't seem that interesting. So I said, well, why don't we find something abandoned, like, you know, maybe something. And he comes up with this abandoned World War II or maybe Cold War era bunker.
So he invites you there.
Yeah, he
just
invites
says,
me
hey,
there.
Come to this creepy bunker.
Yeah. You know, he picks me up at the hotel
And
room,
so-
and like we
yeah.
drive for 2 hours out in the middle of nowhere.
So did he tell you that Adam Back was going to be there, or did Adam
so
just show up?
Adam Back wasn't at this one. So we drive out to this, and then we do like shit. I mean, you know, it's 2 hours of filming, driving out in the car, tons of questions.
And you
Then we
don't think it's odd that you're being driven out to
Oh
the middle
no,
of nowhere?
no! I've done
Okay.
this type of thing before.
Right,
Like,
okay.
like I say, this is the fourth thing I have contact with mainstream media journalists.
So there might
in my
be
life.
more documentaries coming out where you're revealed as Satoshi. Is that
Well, I
possible?
mean, you know, like as an example, I mean, I've been interviewed on TV about cave exploration, about my art stuff. I mean, in fact, I was homeschooled many, many years ago. Like, it's
Those are
yeah,
really important
yeah,
things.
Yeah,
right?
real important. Yeah, but Bitcoin's the most important. But you know, we kind of go around this thing, and being a abandoned World War II era underground bunker. Well, of course, I go bring headlamps and spend most of the time exploring this bunker, watching as a poor cameraman tries to go keep up with me. And at one point, I remember Cullen actually slipped and hit his head quite hard, which I'm pretty sure was like mental decline when he started thinking people were Satoshi.
Right. Okay.
I think I even have it on film somewhere. I should look it up again. But, you know, that was all cool. But, again, nothing about Satoshi.
So this is the second time. And how many times did you meet him in filming?
Well, so I think the time after that was in El Salvador.
Okay.
And then that mostly was with Samson Mao, actually.
All
and
right.
then also, whatever the heck the guy's name is, the prince from Siberia.
Prince Philip.
Serbia.
Does anybody have the
Yeah.
name? Prince Philip of Serbia.
Yeah.
It's good enough.
Yeah. The
We
Serbian
love Prince
weirdo.
Philip. If you're
Yeah.
watching, thank
Yeah.
you.
And, you know, we've, again, filmed hours and hours of footage at this conference.
So they're
Oh,
just wearing you down at this point. They're just.
Well,
they're
I
getting
mean,
as much out of you.
I know. I find it kind of fun. It's fun. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't show up here if I didn't like talking to interviewers. Like, come on.
Right.
You
You
know.
know that the free burgers are good though too, right?
Well, you guys did give me some like coupon for free food, so you know this is
Always
obviously
nice.
worth it. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody's curious about the big reveal, right? Because that's
Well,
what really
so
that's what got
We
that's what
do
got people.
this. Then he shows up yet again at Riga in like 2023 again, And again, it was kind of the same thing. Do a few hours of filming at that. That was also with Adam Back this time. I remember we did some filming like right outside the conference center. And then it was like, well, we should get you and Adam and like again film somewhere interesting. And I told him, well, we can't go back to that bunker again. Let's go to somewhere more interesting. What do you have?
So he's just taking you to all the sites.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's like I challenge him, like find something more interesting. And sure enough, he finds this, I believe it was, an abandoned cement plant from like the Cold War era.
Nothing says digital cash.
Yeah,
like abandoned cement plants.
Well, Adam Back brought this up, actually.
Oh, he did?
Brought
This
up.
was an
like,
on-air
this
footage.
This is a weird like thing to kind of promote. But, I mean, I want to explore an abandoned cement plant. This is fun. And he did come. Only this time around, the main footage you see of like us way up top there, you got to understand that thing's a fucking death trap. Where we actually was, whereas there's
the best place to ask people about Satoshi.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there were these like cement silos, probably like 50, 70 feet high, something like that. And it was actually a train station. So the trains would come in, like rise up this very long, kilometer-long ramp, eventually end up at the top of these silos and dump all their contents down. That's all well cool. And I'm sure it was safe back when it was running. But by the time we got there, metal scrappers had stolen everything that was made of metal, including the railings. So every time you see like Adam Back like standing around and like see a little like thing there, if he steps like
he's
2
actually
feet
just
that way,
worried
he'll
for
die.
his life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great fun. And I his cameraman, being a cameraman, kept on walking backwards, doing like, let's do the cool shot thing. I kept telling him, dude, you are gonna kill yourself. Like, if you keep walking backwards, you are going to trip, you are going to fall, and this is going to be a very awkward documentary.
At what point does it become clear to you? Because I think watching
it
the
took
documentary,
a while. It really, so that
it seems
scene,
like,
I think, I may be wrong on this, but I think that was basically the scene where he finally, after all these hours of footage, finally raises
he
the
cuts
Satoshi
to the
question.
chase.
Yeah. And honestly, my suspicion is Cullen went to HBO originally saying, we're going to go create a documentary on the rise of Bitcoin. It'll be about the cypherpunks and all this.
Who wants to see that?
Exactly. I mean, what I've heard is it was supposed to be like, a 5-episode thing, just like his previous thing on QAnon. And my guess is as he got more and more footage, he realized that we are even nerdier and less watchable than QAnon people.
Well, so I did talk to Samson Mao and Adam Back in Lugano. These are two other notable participants. So Samson's story, and let me interject here, is that he knew from the get-go that they were looking for Satoshi, that he had paperwork from them saying, hey, we're going to be looking for Satoshi.
Paperwork.
This is Samson Mao on the record. On the record. So
I mean, Samson got a much better deal. Like I'm sure they paid for the helicopters and all the food he ate.
So you weren't paid for any food, then?
All I got was a ride to some really cool bunkers, and getting an opportunity to risk Adam Back's
So there's
life.
no validity. There's no validity that you knew that they were looking for Satoshi, and
not initially.
I heard this from Adam as well.
Yeah.
Adam's allegation is that you might have played into it a little bit.
Of course I did. I mean, for the record, I am as Satoshi as you are. And I invented Bitcoin. You invented Bitcoin. You especially invented Bitcoin. You're suspicious.
What about her? Do you think is like more Bitcoin?
Well, it's obvious. The people who are actually Satoshi, they went into deep cover. As an example,
the guy hiding under the chair over there.
Well, I mean, we didn't get this on camera, but eventually, at some point, Cullen's cameraman kind of admitted, I invented Bitcoin, but I was just so stressed out by the block size debate and all this. I decided to go into documentary filmmaking.
So your claim here is that you had no foreknowledge. You didn't egg them on in terms of thinking that you might be Satoshi.
Well, I certainly egged them on once they brought up the question. But from my perspective at least, this was a very small part of it. And as I remember, he basically
because
asked the question
it might be
like
kind
once.
of fun to be alleged to be Satoshi.
I mean, it's happened to me before.
Right.
And I got to say, I strongly suspect that Cullen actually found the website of this other dude who accused me of being Satoshi like back in 2016. And he probably took the crib notes of all his accusations.
I see. Yes, I think this was a Medium article, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, there was a bit of
Medium,
there's another character we haven't talked about in that documentary, Roger Ver, who was also there, and he has a bit of an obsession with you.
Yeah, well, I'm just so good looking.
Yeah. So what do you think that he might have? Do you think he thinks that you might be Satoshi, and that this is the
I highly
genesis
doubt
of
it.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
so truthfully, my answer to that is I highly doubt that. I think Roger Ver dislikes me because I am one of the
Because he names you at a certain point in the documentary. He says, Peter Todd caused the whole block size wars.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing as being Satoshi. and also, notably, my suspicion with Roger Ver is he probably believes that Satoshi was a big blocker.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of textual evidence to suggest that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's wrong about that. Like, I think it's actually reasonable that Satoshi did
if you
think
believe the
big
Mike
blocks
Hearn
worked.
emails are real. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm. After this documentary's come out, there's yet more evidence to be suspicious of them because Mike Hearn just refuses to do the basic things of like releasing the headers, which would at least give you some indication.
Now we're in the deep inside baseball here.
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
layers.
That's, whatever. Mike Hearn can do his thing, but Satoshi. It would not surprise me if Satoshi just didn't understand how Bitcoin worked that well initially, and originally thought, oh well, the big blocks things will probably work. And there's certainly a motivated reasoning here. I mean, do you really want to create Bitcoin if all it can do is support, 100 million users or something? How exciting is that? Now, of course, then we go on to invent L2s, which allegedly, according to my current, Satoshi was already working on.
Right.
But, you can imagine Satoshi thinking, yeah, this big block thing will probably work. In much the same way as you imagine Satoshi thinking that a halving cycle will probably work and fees will probably pay for security.
Well, before we get to that, so how did you feel watching the documentary? Because it came out before the documentary aired that you were a participant, and there was a poly market with some betting on who the Satoshi. Right.
Yeah, I was not an option on the.
Yeah.
I was an option on the poly market, but indirectly because there was a catch-all other category. So I learned about this. Like I learned that Cullen wasn't just.
When did you know that he was going to point the finger at you? Because you had to know.
You got to remember, Cullen asked a lot of questions.
Well, for 5 hours in that cement plant, I bet you guys were doing
probably
something.
more, actually. I mean, I could add it up, but it's probably on the order of talking to him for like 30 hours or something. That's probably the total amount. And I didn't know that he would actually go with this. And also, I didn't leave with the impression he was really serious about this. Like,
what do you mean?
I mean, like he asked the question.
Like he didn't really want to make a documentary about Satoshi that like wasn't.
Well,
his
yeah,
passion?
it wasn't really clear. It wasn't clear. Like, is this just one part of many things he's asking, or is this something he's actually going to go with as the main thrust of the documentary? And of course, on the ride back, I mean, we talked about tons of other stuff that wasn't related to Satoshi. And for that matter, I mean, I believe the order was we had that question, and we went to another part of this plant. And kind of.
So you didn't even know that was going to be like a significant. part
I mean, he never asked me any follow-up questions. Like that just happened to be the last time we talked to each other, and I figured, well, he's got a pile of footage, and at some point, HBO or whoever the hell. I mean, come on, I don't think at the time I knew HBO was funding this.
So you didn't even know that HBO was involved.
Yeah, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think he'd actually mentioned HBO. Now, obviously, it would have been some big media company, but
usually when people have expensive cameras, and
exactly,
they're following you around,
yeah. I mean, the amount of travel he did in the time, I'm sure it was easily a $250,000 project.
But so there was no formal, hey, we're going to accuse you of being Satoshi.
Nope.
Or like they'd come to you with a findings like, hey, we have this evidence.
I learned about this when journalists who had gotten screener copies saw it and started emailing me saying, hey, you're accused of being Satoshi. It was kind of funny because initially they actually said, I think the very first email I got said something along the lines of like the documentary that's coming out.
Right.
And I had to ask the journalist, well, what documentary? I don't know. I've filmed for a lot of journalists. I mean, which one is it? I really don't know. Cullen's never talked to me after that. Maybe we said something minor on Signal, but I'm not, again, I'm not actually sure I even had any contact info for him. I'd have to double check this, but that's when I really found out. And of course, one journalist gets followed by like another 30 more pretty quickly. But
so there was nobody who came to you and said, "Here's the evidence," because there are
absolutely not.
Essentially,
and that is notable because so Cullen's big reveal, right, is Satoshi says something about replaced by fee. I, in my second message ever in Bitcoin Talk, reply to Satoshi correcting some minor technical mistake he makes, and that's like, oh well, actually he logged into the
very close to the date where he left.
Yeah, very close to the date. And had Cullen actually asked me about that, I probably would have realized, oh, wait a second, when I made that message, my real name was not on that account. It was under a pseudonym.
Yes. Yep.
And I suspect Cullen...
Which was pointed out by Greg Maxwell.
Yeah.
Yep.
I suspect Cullen also knew this. He'd probably
Well,
done
there was
his
a lot of
research.
with the evidence where if you looked at the actual evidence and then asked a couple supporting questions, it would fall
Yeah.
apart. It was flimsy evidence.
Well, and this is why I think Cullen never bothered asking me any follow-ups.
Well, there was
Because
a-
he didn't want to know it was bullshit.
I think there was a-
He
there
probably
was
did
a-
know it was bullshit.
there was a second piece of information. There was the claim that you were an expert at destroying Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an even more absurd thing. Because
What was the context of that chat? Because that was one piece of evidence that I wasn't familiar with.
Well, so the context of that is a chat on, I believe, the Bitcoin Dev IRC channel, maybe Bitcoin Wizards.
I think it was Bitcoin Wizards.
Yeah,
right?
maybe Bitcoin Wizards.
Which it's amazing that he got that deep.
I don't think it is.
No, you
No.
think he's somebody just sent
No,
him a
this was
random-
probably his full-time job for like 3 years. This stupid documentary, that's probably the amount of effort it took.
Right.
So anyway, he did find this. Keep in mind, searches do work. There are computers who can find things that people have written before. You type in like Peter Todd and you hit search. It's a pretty cool tool. You should try it out sometime. I think it's called Google. So, he did drag this up, but that discussion was actually about a cryptographic technique called proof of sacrifice. And proof of sacrifice was something I seem to have discovered pretty early on. I'm not sure if I'm the first person to really notice this, but I was certainly one of the first people. And what's neat about Bitcoin is, so proof of work, like the Adam Back invention, which technically is an Adam Back's invention, but yeah,
Good fact check.
yeah. But like Hashcash is saying, I have computing power, I'll grind away at a hash, and I will commit my computing power in a provable way to some cryptographically, hashed message. All right, I'm basically saying this thing, I will artificially make it more expensive by proving that I did a lot of compute cycles. But the problem with Hashcash is I might have a more efficient computer than you. Right? You may be some dude who just has a phone and it costs you a lot of money to make a Hashcash token. I have a much better computer.
Supercomputer, of course, right? Yeah.
Or just more efficient one, and I can hash at a much lower cost. Now, with Bitcoin, because I can make a mathematical proof that a Bitcoin was destroyed, I now have a proof of sacrifice that I took some Bitcoin, which is very easy to measure value, it's that much Bitcoin, and then I destroyed it in such a way that the destruction commits to.
Is this different than
that
a proof of
message.
burn, or is it the same?
It's proof of burn's another term for this. Proof of burn kind of gets used in a broader way by some context, but it's roughly the same thing.
So the evidence here that Cullen put together.
It's total bunk. And what's funny about it is what's really bunk about it is proof of sacrifice to implement properly on Bitcoin, especially at the time that we've done that, you must actually move the coins. So it's the exact opposite scenario than what Cullen was talking about.
Right.
If I'd actually done a proof of sacrifice,
You would have moved the coins.
all the coins would have
That's
moved.
revealing
Yeah.
that you were. Yeah.
Whereas Cullen interpreted it as it's destroying the private keys, but that's not a proof. I can't prove to you I don't have Satoshi's coins. I can persuade you that it's unlikely I did, but I cannot prove to you I do not have Satoshi's coins. It is fundamentally impossible.
So when did you watch the document? Have you watched the documentary in full? And when did you watch? Did you pop open HBO? Were you an HBO subscriber? Like, did you subscribe to
Fuck
HBO? To watch yourself?
I probably shouldn't admit how I first watched it because
okay.
it may have involved a bit of piracy.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But
There's still some laws out there.
hypothetically, I may have watched it from someone else's account, possibly streamed over the internet.
You were
in a
like the
clever
other
way.
person on Netflix.
That's a hypothetical. I'm not admitting to this, but I will admit I have seen the documentary. I think I've only bothered to watch it once, and
How did you feel about seeing yourself up on the silver screen?
I mean, I've seen myself on the silver screen a zillion times. Like,
Okay.
there's nothing that special about it.
And so
HBO,
you did go.
HBO is probably not even the biggest platform I've been on. Like really early on in like 2014, I got interviewed by the BBC a few
Right.
times actually. Like, HBO is just yet another one of these things.
Yeah, one famous exploit we might cover in the history segment. But so after this, you go into hiding.
Yeah,
And
about
you're still
that.
in hiding here,
Yeah, I
right?
am in hiding right now. I am hiding behind all of you.
Because according to Wired magazine,
Yeah.
since this
Yeah.
come out, it's been hard for you, and that
Well,
you've been
I mean, to
living
be
under
clear,
hardship.
Like, if you look around here, doesn't this look like a church?
A little bit, sure.
And as everyone knows, churches are sacred ground, and bad guys can't come in. I mean, I think vampires can't. And I'm
Right.
mostly hiding from vampires.
You did smell like garlic, actually.
Yeah,
Now that I noticed that.
Yeah.
So what did happen?
Well-
and did people in your life come to you and say, "Hey, why didn't you tell me that you were Satoshi?" Were they upset about that, or?
Well, I mean, first of all, I will go say that I have always had a policy of not actually talking about my personal life. There are like some things I'll happily admit. I'll admit I made pots when I was a kid, but I will not admit like who might have actually gone and known me at the time.
So you
all
don't
this.
still make pots. You aren't
No
a
comment.
potter. You're not a potter.
I mean, if someone wants to take me to pottery studio tomorrow, like we could have some fun. It'd be great.
We might be able
I
to
haven't
find a
made pot in years.
documentary. Yeah, we'll find a documentary crew that's willing to do that.
Finding Satoshi post HBO when he goes and creates a pottery studio.
This is the
specialized
deleted
Japanese
scenes.
pottery.
So there wasn't any conversations with people in your life. There wasn't anything.
I mean, like.
Because there was a bit of an effort.
You got to remember too that when this came out, of course, all the journalists start contacting me, and of course, I also got like legal advice related, because of course, I have a lot of journalists, a lot of lawyers in my life because of fucking Craig Wright cases.
Right.
So I kind of talked to some of them about this stuff. They're all like, "Oh, you shouldn't go talk to the journalists." And I was like, "Dude, this is a PR problem. I should just talk to them, respond to all their emails." And they'll probably go write articles saying, yeah, this HBO thing's obvious bullshit. And that's exactly what happened for the most part. Like, the documentary as a documentary is kind of entertaining, but, most of the headlines were on the order of, yeah, we didn't find Satoshi. And that part worked out, which meant that anyone who actually knew me, I mean, I think for the most part they would have figured, yeah, this is just yet another weird thing Peter's done.
So as an artist, as someone who went to art school, what is your artistic critique of Money Electric now? What do you think of it as a creative work? Because this is someone spent 3 years on this, right?
As a creative work, my suspicion is Cullen is very frustrated by the fact he couldn't figure out a way to get the narrative of Bitcoin understandable enough for a mainstream audience, of the parts of the narrative that are interesting and of conflict. And I think the block size war would be an interesting example of this. I get, my impression talking to him was he really wanted to go talk about the block size war a lot. And my suspicion is, how do you explain to normies what the hell the block size war was?
Right. Especially in an hour and a half.
Yeah, yeah. And I am sure he thought he could go and make, 5 episodes of this and like bring it out in stages, but just realized it just didn't work.
Has he
And-
reached out to you since this was published?
Not other than on Twitter in kind of, I could almost say passive-aggressive ways.
Because
but
he's sort of standing by, his finding here.
My impression with that is I think he really has no choice. He cannot admit he screwed this up because that screws up marketing of the whole film. I mean, it doesn't work. Also, he's probably been told by lawyers, like, if there's certain things he admits, he's completely screwed. I probably could go sue him. I might not win, but, if someone wants to donate $1 million and like have some interesting legal games, there could be interesting things we could do.
There
but
are some.
It'd be a waste of money.
There are some normies like in and around my life, and people that I've talked to who have said, they've had friends, relatives watching the documentary, and they've said, this is pretty convincing. Like, hey, don't you know that Peter guy?
Well,
what would you say to people who, were rickrolled by the?
A lot of people who do not have critical thinking skills.
Right.
And I got to say, I think the context of all this actually helps me. And what do I mean by the context? I mean things like the election and the general perception of journalism, of how much it's declined. Like, as an example, let's suppose hypothetically this documentary came out 20 years ago. Also, let's suppose Bitcoin was invented 20 years earlier.
Before the internet, maybe.
Yeah, before the internet. Yeah. If all that was true, I think the reaction would have been more believing. because there's a better assumption journalists.
You think
tell
you
the
would
truth.
have you would be more branded by this?
Yeah. Whereas like these days, it's like, oh, HBO just wants to make a documentary. Is this going to be filmed? It's going to be shown next to Swamp Kings, or
Yeah. So this doesn't affect your life going forward. This isn't.
Well, the issue with that, of course, is crazy people keep on watching the damn thing, and as an example, when it came out, the first thing I did was I went to an area where I may or may not have my official residence, and made sure all the security cameras were working, because I don't really want anyone to go and like break in undetected. That'd be kind of annoying.
Right.
And these days, if you try to sneak into any apartment I'm in, well, you're gonna have a bad day, and you probably want to wear a mask.
We're
there's some basic stuff around that, but honestly, I don't think this is that different than the stuff than the risks of already being exposed to by Craig Wright. Craig Wright has screwed over a lot of people for a lot of money. There's probably a lot of people who think I personally made them lose their life savings. Gregor Maxwell too, for that matter, and. That's always been a risk. Fortunately, I'm in a church, so I'm safe, so it's all good.
Well, let's turn the page a little bit and get into the real history then, since we're moving out of the HBO fiction.
History. Yeah.
You can check out his IMDb account for more information. Probably
Did they
exists.
actually create an IMDb?
Oh, I'm sure you have an IMDb account. I'll make one for you.
I wound up getting a Wikipedia entry finally,
okay.
which was not a good thing. But
you crossed over.
Man, if I'm an IMDb, I'm gonna have to turn like a real actor.
So let's go back. Let's wind the clock to 2010. So this is the first. You mentioned the reply to Satoshi. Yeah. So this would have been
when
December.
I got my Bitcoin Talk account.
Yeah, this is December 2010. As Retep, which is your name backwards. Very clever. Very.
I am so
You were
smart.
really trying to hide your OPSEC there. It was great OPSEC.
And actually, I got to point out, Retep. If you Google it, even right now, there's actually, I think it's so some relatively well-known like American cartoon.
Reptar is the Rugrats. There was the
Nickelodeon. It's been done a couple times. Yeah, so that's what will pop up.
And Nickelodeon, I don't know if that's
it's a pretty common pseudonym.
So you are on the Bitcoin Talk forum. And
I don't know. I was really on it.
Right.
That was literally the second time I posted on Bitcoin Talk.
Right. So when does Bitcoin come into your life? When do you join the peer-to-peer network?
Well, so. Of course, one answer to this is when I start working on Bitcoin, which is many years prior, by trying to invent it. But, when I believe when I saw the Bitcoin white paper for the first time, I think that was like late 2009, maybe 2010 or so. I think someone, had told me about this.
You weren't on the cryptography mailing list?
The cryptography mailing list, no. And I don't believe I was on the cypherpunk mailing list either.
Because there are people we know who received the binaries of Bitcoin that even predate this.
I didn't learn about it through that. Of course, famously, I talked to Adam Back and Hal Finney when I was like 15 on the Blue Sky mailing list. But that was a completely separate thing many years prior. And
so what were you doing back there? How did you just met Hal Finney and Adam Back on a random mailing list? You were just
because I was a
young libertarian. What was even Blue Sky?
I was a young libertarian, freedom of speech minded kid, like so many others. And unlike so many others, I thought about it and realized, freedom of speech is all well and good, but unless you have freedom of money, I mean, how are you going to do a protest if your bank accounts are frozen?
So you were just all about fighting the system back then as a kid.
I don't know. I mean, I've actually always been kind of politically moderate, but I think ideally politically moderate in
you're
Western,
Canadian, right?
Politically moderate in Western democracy should be believing in freedom of speech. I mean, it's literally like the First Amendment. It's like after we made all this stuff about how government could work, it's like, all right, what else? Well, obviously freedom of speech. I mean, Canada's got that too.
We got one clap over there from somebody. Let's give a clap for freedom of speech. All-time highs. We can clap for freedom on all-time highs.
Like, when I was... probably when I was like 14 or 15, I did take like the high school civics class. You were mandated
I never
to take.
had a civics class, to be honest.
In Canada, had it. So it was like one half semester or 1.5 year civics, and then the other half year I chose economics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the civics thing was all about, well, obviously, our freedoms are good, yada, yada, yada. Here's how government works. Here's how protests work. Like, that was sort of government-approved curriculum. why wouldn't you want to go and say bad things about your government? That's how it's supposed to work. Well, if the government can go freeze your bank accounts, how are you going to go pay for the signs, go say bad things about your government? Like, it's just such an obvious thing. Of course you need freedom of money to have freedom of speech. And we saw that in Canada with the truckers' protest, where they start, illegally for that matter, seizing bank accounts. And my understanding legally in that situation is actually the banks might be screwed over this in the future, because what they did was not legal.
Well, we're on the Blue Sky mailing list.
Yeah.
You're with Adam Back and Hal Finney.
Blue Sky.
Do you know these? Do you know who they are? Like at that
Vaguely.
point?
I mean, keep on. So
they're just random old guys. They're
Yeah.
just like.
Yeah, random old guys my age now.
Right.
But so Blue Sky came out of the Free Net project, which was a decentralized, censorship-resistant publication mechanism with DHTs, and people start talking about where we go next. Obviously, money is a part of this, and I happen to be interested in Freenet. And of
When
course,
did you start using the internet? When is the
a
internet
lot
started?
later than most people, actually.
Okay.
I think I got my first internet access, which was like over dial-up, probably when I was, 13 maybe 14.
Okay. So 13, and then 2 years
Relatively late.
later, you're talking about digital cash.
Oh, yeah?
With Hal Finney.
Well, I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And honestly, I am pretty sure with Hal Finney, I probably didn't know who he was.
Right.
With Adam Back, I think I knew what Hashcash was. And I was like, oh, cool, you invented Hashcash. But, it's just some dude who invented a relatively simple way of using hash functions. I mean,
What is that? Yeah. What is
well,
that?
and like none of us were that close to figuring out digital money.
Right.
I mean, Adam Back actually pointed out to me, as far as he knows, I'm the first person to actually say that a chain of digital signatures signing transactions could be a way to do it. Which kind of seems obvious, but I might be the first person to actually write it down. But I'm sure if I hadn't, other people would have. And none of us, like, the thing that we really missed was, I don't think any of us understood that you could use proof of work to make the record expensive to change. We were all kind of talking about using proof of work to issue the coins. But then once you issue the coins, how do you make it hard to double spend them? And somehow we completely missed the whole blockchain part. I kind of said, well, you'd have the chain of records. But my thinking was, well, maybe we could somehow use a DHT. Well, why did I think that? Because, of course, I was interested in Freenet. So
fast forward to 2010. The price then is mooning. It's 25 cents.
No.
It's 20,
No,
yeah.
I'm not sure in 2010 there was a price.
There was a price, and it would have been
maybe
around
late 2010. Yeah.
This is now
but,
we're talking
but
about.
But I should say, when I believe when I first actually learned about Bitcoin, it was through the white paper, and I don't think it had a price.
Well, so I'm zooming forward to
Yeah.
your Retap comments,
Yeah.
your Bitcoin talk. At that point, Bitcoin would have been ripping
So
to
my
50
first
cents.
comment.
50 cents. That's a lot.
Remember, my
right.
first comment was trying to go buy an invite to this new decentralized-ish social network thing that someone had created.
Wait, sorry. What's this? What is this?
Well, you can look it up on Bitcoin Talk. My very first post was trying to buy this invite with Bitcoin. And I
interesting.
must have had Bitcoin at that time. And then the second thing is then this technical correction. And I believe around roughly that time.
December 2010. Right.
Yeah, I mean, some point in 2010,
But
I believe I read
how-
the source code.
How deep were you into Bitcoin at that point?
I mean, I've read the source
you're
code.
Mining, you're
I wasn't
doing development.
mining.
You weren't.
Yeah, I
you
wasn't
weren't
mining.
No. You didn't have some
mining
rig
mining
in
was
your
later.
Canadian Arctic mining rig going on?
No, I got in late to mining, and honestly, the reason is because in 2008, I think, that would have been when I sort of dropped out of art school temporarily to take on this, this electronics job at this geophysics startup.
Okay.
Then I kind of went part-time, was finishing off my arts degree, and then I think in 2010 maybe, I'd have to double check this, but roughly 2010-ish, then I'd graduated from that and then started a physics
So you don't
degree.
remember the moment where you learned about Bitcoin?
I think it was something as simple as someone sent me an email pointing out this white paper. I forget who the hell that would have been. It was probably a coworker.
So when you're responding to Satoshi, how much experience did you have at the time with
I mean,
the Bitcoin code?
I'm pretty sure I'd run a node. I probably had a bit of Bitcoin. I'd played with it, but unless you wanted to go buy drugs, there wasn't really that much you could do with it. And I don't know how many cameras are here, so I shouldn't admit
I
anything.
think there's a couple up there, but
Yeah.
So your big entrance is really in 2013. That's when I'd
Yeah,
say
yeah.
you burst
Well,
on the scene, right?
Well, the thing that really got me attention was going up against Gavin Andresen and saying he's wrong.
Right. Well, let's
Yeah.
get to that in a second.
Yeah.
So what happens in the intervening period? Because there are a couple fork, the upgrades that happen. You're not super involved in that.
I followed P2SH in the op eval thing. While that was all kind of happening, I was watching the forum. I was really busy.
But did you think this was going to work? Were you convinced?
Oh, I mean, when I read the Bitcoin white paper, my reaction was, "Fuck! I should have thought of that." Like I was immediately convinced. Obviously, this works. It was only later, after I started thinking about it more, that's like, well, okay, it has this problem, block size was
because you are famous for talking about Satoshi's problems, right? Like that is essentially your claim to fame.
Yeah. I mean, Satoshi made plenty of mistakes.
I will say that probably nobody has done more to invalidate the Satoshi roadmap than yourself. Is that a fair statement?
Well, no one has done more to popularize than validating of it. Like, you got to understand, like, with block size, it did not take long. I mean, literally, like, one of the very first replies Satoshi ever got was pointing out, well, obviously this doesn't scale.
Right.
That
was James A. Donald's.
Yeah, it might have been even the first reply. I'd have to double check this, but
it is the first
very
reply,
early on, people recognized this. And I remember myself, I recognized this was obviously an issue, but I figured, well, I mean, maybe it is enough that like people run really big nodes and like other people actually don't. Maybe that's enough to work. It was only when I thought through the implications of this, I realized, yeah, Mike Kern's delusional.
But Mike Kern's not even really a player at that point. So we're in February 2013.
No. At that point, he'd already written like the
Bitcoin.
Well, and also the Bitcoin wiki page on scaling.
Oh.
Because I remember reading that and actually talking to my coworkers at my job about this, saying, well, here's how this plausibly could scale.
So your coworkers at your job were also into Bitcoin in 2012?
Well, they knew about it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
sounds like an interesting
I'd
company.
have to double check, but they.
You were saying you were doing minerals. It was minerals.
So it was a geophysics startup, but the thing we were creating was a new type of gravity sensor that could detect the gradient of the gravitational field in a survey airplane, which is a nightmarishly hard thing to do because gravity you can only sense it by the force it exerts.
This is a sensor that you put in an airplane.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So like a sensor like. The size of like two of these stages. It's this huge thing. It's a dewar full of liquid helium with a bunch of like superconducting like squid sensors in it. And I was like, my job was analog electronics. Like I designed a lot of the analog parts that like measured signals and all this, and as well as like some power stuff and whatnot. So. It was an engineering job.
So this is what radicalized you, this Wikipedia page about scaling. Is that
well,
fair?
The thing is, it didn't radicalize me. It was sort of the opposite. It's like I read it, it's like, oh, that seems plausible. And I distinctly remember talking to my coworkers about this, because they were interested in Bitcoin too. I mean, you got to understand, like, that type of engineering attracts weirdos who like all kinds of interesting stuff.
Like Freenet and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my coworkers, my understanding is like he got a master's in cryptography.
Sounds useful. Yeah.
It wasn't. It really wasn't. He worked in signal processing, but he happened to.
Well, it sounds like he got into Bitcoin early, like yourself.
I don't know. He actually did in that, ironically. He was much more interested in signal processing, but he happened to have like a master's in cryptography. They just picked up, back in probably the 90s or so, and it's just a very technical crowd. They're interested in this stuff, and. It was only as I sort of saw it through, well, what actually happens if people stop cooperating? I mean, this is an adversarial system. Obviously, we can't expect people to just voluntarily run nodes and just voluntarily create blocks in the right way. What are the incentives here? And that's when I started realizing, yeah, obviously block size is actually an issue.
Well, just to set the stage, so Satoshi and then the lead maintainer, Gavin Andresen, who followed him, their roadmap was really...
That's a controversial statement.
The word selection there was followed him, right?
Well, lead maintainer Gavin is a controversial statement.
He was given the lead maintainership.
Controversial statement.
What is controversial about that?
Because not everyone really would want to go say that he was really the lead maintainer. like one way people have described Gavin is more of being like the PR guy.
But Satoshi did email the contributors who were contributing to Bitcoin at that point, and he did say, "Does anybody want to step up and take the lead on the project?" And then he did disappear after that.
Well, I mean, our understanding, of course, the going to the CIA thing definitely triggered some disappearing.
The disappearance.
I believe that is actually true. I mean, I'm not an expert on the history.
So
of
what
this
we're
shit,
saying is that
but,
Satoshi and his maybe official or unofficial heir, they wanted to scale Bitcoin by making the blocks larger, essentially increasing scaling that way. Satoshi didn't think that we would need many nodes to run Bitcoin potentially.
I think Satoshi convinced himself Bitcoin could be interesting by making that argument. I do not know that Satoshi actually believed that when they left.
Well, I'd say you really have a couple big arguments, right? You come out, you try to invalidate the technical roadmap.
So you got to understand, the big argument was Gavin Andresen had pushed this technical roadmap that we're just going to increase block size, and his rationale for it, a really important part of it, was the idea that miners would have a disincentive to making their blocks too big, because the blocks are too big, they won't propagate, and thus miners will lose money. And I was one of the people who realized that's not actually how this works.
I would add a slight caveat to that. And I think that they saw the path for Bitcoin like PayPal. They saw something where distribution to end users would create regulatory pressure to kind of give Bitcoin sort of passage into the regulatory apparatus.
I mean, I think that's sort of an economic interpretation of some of the thinking. I'm talking more about the technical justification for this.
Right, I'm saying there was two layers. There was sort of the economic...
Well, I mean, that's also like, I think what Mike Kern was arguing.
Well, sort of, this worked for PayPal, and we can be as big if we have users, right? We need to gain users.
But I'd say from a technical point of view, the main thing that Gavin was arguing was there's this natural disincentive to being too big. Because I think everyone recognized that, obviously, if you only have one miner, Bitcoin has failed. If it's one
then
pool,
you're PayPal at that point.
Yeah, one pool has failed. Also, if people can't run nodes at all, Bitcoin's failed. But the argument Gavin had was basically there's a disincentive to making blocks too big, because if they're so big that they don't propagate around the peer-to-peer network properly and they don't get to other miners, miners will go lose money. And I was one of the first people who correctly recognized that's not actually how the incentives work. If I'm a miner with more than a certain percentage hash power, I earn more money relative to you if my blocks take longer to propagate. And the way I went and showed this was this kind of really hacky thing, which said the threshold for that is certainly at least like 50%. Other people refined that argument. But the important thing is...
This is selfish mining you're talking about.
Basically, yeah. Prior to people calling it selfish mining. And,
to quote your favorite Emin Gonzalez.
Well, yeah.
Favorite.
Emin, of course, came up with the term selfish mining, was really pissed off when the Bitcoin community was like, yeah, we already figured this out. But,
He did academically claim it, though.
Yeah. His math was better than us. He nailed it down more precisely under certain certain assumptions. But the important thing was I had a really good explanation of this. And then I posted saying, hey, yeah, Gavin Andresen's wrong. And that turned into a massive shit fight on Bitcoin Talk.
That lasted several years. So let's talk about the massive shit fight, though. Because you did raise a lot of concerns about how Bitcoin would go forward and stay decentralized, right? That was kind of the tip of your argumental spear, I would argue.
I have to go push back on that phrasing, though, which is that I didn't so much raise those concerns, I wrote about them.
Right. Other people, it was in the air, and you just plucked them, and you gave voice to the people who were denied.
Like the viewpoint I proposed there, other than certain bits of the technical analysis I came up with myself, the thrust of it was something that anyone remotely technical and competent agreed with.
There was a social pressure to speaking out against the perceived leader of the project, correct?
Well, the thing is, like, Gavin was alone, and Gavin and Mike Kern of the technical community, they were alone.
But Peter Woolley and Greg Maxwell were still pretty...
Well, and they basically
Jeff Garzik as well would have been a major contributor at the point.
But the technical brain power was against that way of scaling. I mean, it's the Greg Maxwells of the world, literally Greg Maxwell, were obviously against this. Now, there was potential for compromise. Like, I think Peter Wool did go propose, well, maybe we could raise it sometimes on a schedule. And
I think my
hope that
question was
computing
like,
comes
how
up.
well do you think your assessment of the situation back then has held up, right? So you really raised.
Oh, I'm absolutely correct. Yeah,
okay, so
no.
you're still so
Yeah.
you were really
No,
raising.
we nailed this. Like we were absolutely correct.
So you still think that mining pool centralization is a critical problem
Yep.
for Bitcoin? Can you explain why that's as relevant as it was back then, and why nothing has really changed in your view?
Well, I mean, when push comes to shove, the ability to spin up new mining pools is really critical for Bitcoin. And also being able to have decentralized mining pools, which annoyingly was more of a thing then than now.
Because
is
there
critical.
seems to be a belief back then that we could solve mining in a way that we maybe haven't, right?
Well, we did actually for all. Like P2 pool worked really well. There are certain technical things that made it work less well, and also the lead maintainer of it quit to go do other stuff. Kind of like Satoshi, actually. But at some point...
Is that a clue you're leaving for Cullen?
You never
Should we
know.
call
You never know.
Cullen
Well, I mean,
Hoback, are you watching?
to
This
be
guy's
clear,
dropping
Cullen-
alpha. Are we over 90K?
Yeah.
88,
Yeah,
or
so,
we got
yeah.
somebody in the back watching.
Cullen, I mean, obviously should do this as a weekly program, finding
Right.
Satoshi, who are going to accuse this week.
Right.
But,
So we're on mining pools.
yeah. So on mining pools, like... It's obviously a concern, and I think one of the ways we could see this...
But Satoshi didn't feel like mining pools were a concern, right? He just sort of
Satoshi,
expected.
I don't think realized mining pools would be a thing.
Yeah, he did. He talks about the gentleman's
Right, but
agreement.
not when he created Bitcoin. And so a really good example of how Satoshi didn't get this stuff is the Bitcoin white paper. It talks about the longest chain. Satoshi implemented Bitcoin with the longest chain as the rule for which
Not the
blockchain you
heaviest
select.
chain. Is that
Yeah,
the,
and longest chain does not work. You have to do the most total work chain, or the consensus is trivial to attack. Like Satoshi just got basic stuff wrong. And that's not a slight against Satoshi, it's just there's a limit to what you're going to get correct the first time around. In any engineering project, it is exceptionally hard to predict everything, and you will screw up on some things.
Well, let me give a specific example. So in 2014, there was the famous example of ghash.io. It was a very large mining pool. It reached 51% of the network. And you famously sold off half of your Bitcoins
Sure did.
as a way to raise awareness about that.
No, I sold it off because I had written down a fucking investment plan saying, if these things happen, I will go sell this much, take the motion out of it.
What else was on your list there?
I'd have to go double. I think like one example might have been.
So you don't feel like you overreacted to that?
Oh no, I actually did really well in that because I actually happened to go sell at a peak for multiple years.
So you bought back in after thereafter?
Well, I mean, no comments specifics there, but let's just say, had I bought back in, I would have made a lot more money than I could have otherwise done. So.
Okay, but you said
I-
mining pools are as much of an issue as they were back then in your view.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen is sort of, and I got to point out, I mean, at the time I figured, well, there may be things that mitigate this, but I wrote down a plan, and I'm going to go follow it, because that's how you invest properly. You should take emotion out of this. You shouldn't react based on, like, you should, especially also, you understand, I had quit the day job. All my income was coming from Bitcoin existing. If Bitcoin fails to exist, I will be one of the guys who fixes it, and I got to go pay rent. And I had enough money to go pay rent for quite a while. So,
So there you go.
it's a good decision to go make. Like,
And so this was
it's different for like just a random investor who might have some other journalism fallback.
well,
I mean, I didn't have a
comment
fallback.
there.
I was a
I think
dude
you
with
could.
like half a
I
physics
think you could
degree.
be a passable journalist, especially with the standards these days.
Well,
not
maybe,
being what
yeah,
they were.
yeah. The standards are going down. I'm getting more practice being on the other side.
Right,
of it,
right,
so.
right. So where are we? We're on mining pools,
Yeah.
and so the situation hasn't gotten better in your view.
Well, so mining pools aren't the only issue. The other
So we got
issue,
heaviest chain, mining pools.
Well, very understand. So mining and hashing are two separate things. And I've always tried to use hashing to describe the act of crunching through SHA-256 to go come up with hash solutions. And that is what most people who are quote-unquote mining are actually doing. They run a bunch of rigs, they take power in, they do a bunch of hashing, and then they are selling those hash shares, basically, to mining pools who actually create the blocks. But the thing with hashing is it's inherently decentralized. And the reason why it's inherently decentralized at least some level is that power in ways to use waste heat are inherently decentralized. There is no one place on Earth where all the power is. There's no one nuclear reactor where like all the power is. I mean, the biggest dam in the world is a small fraction of the total hydropower out there, and that's just one power source. So naturally, that tends to spread out, and we've seen that. There just isn't any one big hashing operation that's particularly profitable that makes a big chunk of the world's Bitcoin. It just doesn't work out that way. And because hashing has become more of a commodity business, that is more true than it was, say, in 2014, when getting access to a lot of ASICs was really the critical thing.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. So you're saying even though miners are hashing and geo-diverse, mining pools consolidate and create the same problem.
Yeah. And so why this diversity of hashing is important is, let's suppose that a mining pool does something bad that hashers think is a bad idea. It's relatively easy for hashers to say, screw you, we're going to go point our hash power to someone else. And that process works even better if pointing your hash power to somewhere else is something where someone can create a new pool that has different policies. As an example we've seen in the past year is Ocean.
Right, I was going to jump to that.
Yeah. And, Ocean, for diversity of pools, is cool. Luke Jr. is kind of crazy and just kind of sabotaged.
Well, for
his own
background
project,
for people in the audience, we were on a panel in
yeah.
Lugano at the Plan B conference. We were actually debate partners against Luke Jr. Well, I don't know how many partners. We were on the same side of the debate.
Hell we wound up getting paired back.
Yeah.
You're good at debate, but you're good at debate in a totally different way than me.
Right.
That had nothing to do with what we were talking about.
Yeah, it was very useless there. Yeah. But anyway, Luke Jr. and Mechanic were on the other side, and they have a mining pool that portends a solution to some of the problems that Peter is addressing. Yeah,
and honestly, the thing that Ocean could do best to improve this the most would
be how are they attacking this core issue that you saw all the way back in 2014?
Well, so Ocean specifically, I would say they're not doing a good job of attacking it, because the number one thing Ocean could do that would be good for Bitcoin is to take all of their source code behind how Ocean actually works and just release it publicly. They haven't done that. And why that would be useful is because someone else in an emergency could just take that code, boot up Ocean 2 or Ocean 3 and Ocean 4, and just start up new pools. Currently, if you want to start up a new pool, it's really difficult because the source code, the software you need to do this doesn't exist.
How many people here are mining Bitcoin? Do you guys mine? We got any BitAxe owners out there? Anybody? We've got a BitAxe owner here.
I'm Canadian. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, sure. You want the?
When you talk about Ocean, are you talking about the implementation of Datum, something like Stratum v2, where block template decentralization happens, or are you talking about the Ocean pool?
I've cleverly avoided talking about Datum because I think block template creation isn't that powerful. Luke, I think, was trying to push this idea that pushing block template creation all the way to miners is this really critical thing. But when you get down to it, if Bitcoin's working properly, all the miners, the true miners, the people actually creating blocks, they're probably going to follow basically the same rules. Like, they'll all follow, roughly speaking, the same block template creation rules, because it's pretty clear what's most profitable. And Bitcoin Core is pretty good at creating blocks for miners in the most profitable way. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
So let's take it to the current today. You're working on Libra Relay. Is that your current project?
I mean, Libra Relay is such a trivial project.
Right, it's beneath you, but you are working on it, right?
It is not beneath me. I have explored literal sewers, so there's not much beneath me than that. But
there's
the point is, what Libra Relay actually does is pretty trivial. So I took Bitcoin Core, which has nearly no filters on what sort of transactions can get mined, and I went through the list of filters it does have, and I removed one notable one, which is the limit on op return outputs. And that's kind of a legacy holdover for when people thought filtering transactions could do interesting things. And, I removed that just to say, this isn't Bitcoin Core. It's something else. And then I added code to be exact, I copied someone else's code to then ensure that Libra Relay nodes are always connected to other Libra Relay nodes.
So why does someone use a Libra Relay node?
Honestly, there isn't much reason, because Bitcoin Core doesn't actually filter very much. The reason you use Libra Relay, from the point of view of filtering, is to make a statement. It's to say, yeah, Bitcoin Core filters op return, but you just run this piece of software and the filter is bypassed. And as an example, if you go to opreturnbot.com and you type in text into the field, you can put anything you want into an op return, and using Libra Relay nodes, it'll get to the miners to run the equivalent of Libra Relay.
I want to tie this back to kind of the arc of Satoshi and talking about you as kind of somebody who's poking at these issues, right, of Satoshi's code. So there's the idea, and this was evoked on stage, we talked about it, this idea that Bitcoin is just money, and that arbitrary data use cases for Bitcoin are bad. And this is very mainstream. This is a current talking point on Bitcoin Twitter. And the allegation, again, I'll just say it again, is that Bitcoin is just money. It should not be able to do all these other things. You seem more permissive on that. And I would say that your history...
if you're being strict about this, keep in mind...
So is this a mistake that Satoshi made?
Well, but so Satoshi released Bitcoin without any filtering at all for what could go in blocks.
Right. And you could use any transaction type as well,
anything.
Right? Yeah.
In fact, Satoshi didn't put in filters that are technically necessary for nodes to run properly. And the key thing there is, like, we do not want people creating transactions that will have different meaning after future soft forks, because that causes a bunch of, like, technical problems. It's not a huge issue, but, like, we don't want arbitrary nodes just accept stuff that might become invalid after a soft fork. And that's why there's, like, version
because it would change
bits.
Who owns coins or something like that?
Well, it's not about who owns coins. It's like what opcodes could mean. Because, we have, like, all these opcodes and transaction versions that could in the future mean something special, but currently don't. And it's just not good if, like, your unupgraded node accepts a transaction that's been made invalid by a soft fork. And, I'm really getting the weeds of, like, technical stuff here. But, again, Satoshi not realizing Bitcoin needed this, whatever. I mean, that's just a minor oversight. What Luke Jr. wants to do is say, if you use Bitcoin for a non-monetary reason, that is just blocked by adaptive filters that, look at the transactions you're trying to use to do this, filter out that specifically, and the expectation is, the counterparty would the adversary, as according to Luke Jr., would change how they do stuff, and then you would update the filters, go filter out the new thing. This is meant to be a very active process. And Luke's view is, well, everyone running a Bitcoin node should be constantly updating this to, quote-unquote, protect Bitcoin. Now, I myself, the actual project I'm probably best known for is Open Timestamps.
Right.
And that is a non-monetary use of Bitcoin. I mean, it's not even a token. It's just timestamping data. And people in Luke Jr.'s camp have actively argued that Open Timestamps
they've told me directly that they think that should be stripped out.
Yeah. And my response to that is, well, I really don't care what you think. Open Timestamps is designed that is exceptionally hard to censor.
Well, I think the original idea with this arbitrary data was that we were going to create protocols on top of Bitcoin that used arbitrary data to extend the Bitcoin protocol. That has also kind of died.
There's many versions of this.
Well, you worked on Mastercoin and Counterparty and some of these other...
Well, I mean, I seem to be the guy who did the most work on the theory behind this. And I came up with a client-side validation where basically, if we want to create a protocol that uses Bitcoin to prevent double spends, the rules of that protocol can be enforced client-side. It can be enforced by your wallet. Bitcoin does not need to enforce the rules. The rules can be enforced by your wallet. And on top of that, if the rules are being enforced by your wallet, basically all the data associated with this system can be just passed from one person to another. Very, very minimal data actually needs to be in Bitcoin. And my argument there isn't about, like, making things good for Bitcoin. It's, well, obviously, the less data is in Bitcoin, the cheaper this is and the better it can scale. Now, Open Timestamps is a great example of this. One thing I did a couple years back is I timestamped basically the Internet Archive, which was like, I don't know, 500 million items, 750 million
items. And that's
items.
on everybody's node right now.
Well...
except for Luke Jr.'s.
Yes. But, so I took, the hash digests of like 500 million items, and I created a really massive Merkle tree. I finally wind up with one single digest, and one single transaction was enough to timestamp all this stuff. Now, previous timestamping systems, every single thing you timestamped wound up in the chain separately. And there is not enough block space to timestamp 500 million items, especially with the budget I had. So open timestamp scales. Now, do I care about Bitcoin for that? No. I care about the fact that I want to run a free service and like actually get enough donations to make it work. And that can only happen because open timestamp scales.
Well, so I think we're talking about arbitrary data. We're talking about arbitrary data as a buyer in the fee market. And this is another point, I think, of contention with kind of this new kind of money-only group, is that they are also opposed to things that you've supported, like long-tail emissions, increasing the Bitcoin supply in order to make...
I mean, this is where some of this stuff gets kind of incoherent.
Explain.
So, actually, interesting question. In an audience like this, how many people know what the halving is?
It's pretty good. We had one guy running a bid
so,
axe. So
for the most part, I think everyone realizes that, well, actually, maybe don't. I mean, keep on. So Bitcoin right now is inflationary.
Right.
Right? Like if you own
that's not the popular conception of it, but it is technically true.
It is technically true. If you own one Bitcoin, from a monetary point of view,
you're being diluted today, yeah.
Yeah, and that at the moment is, if I remember correctly, about 0.5% per year.
Who here likes Bitcoin inflation? We want to keep Bitcoin inflationary.
How much? So that money goes to miners for security. Now the theory is.
But so do you believe that we eventually have to get fees activity enough to replace the subsidy? How do you think about that?
I think there's a very good chance that Bitcoin gets completely screwed up by this problem. And to explain, I mean, the issue
is there something on your list where you'll be selling some Bitcoin?
We don't have to do Eric Voskuil's like math class that he did in Riga over again, do we?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like what it really is simply, at the moment, of course, the amount of money that we send to miners guaranteed goes down. And the theory is we're going to replace this all by transaction fees. So there's two separate issues with this. I think one of them more fundamental than the other. The less fundamental reason is, how do you know transaction fees are going to be enough money to prevent 51% attack and other shenanigans? But the second issue, which is actually really fundamental, is the incentives to mine Bitcoin become unstable if transaction fees are more significant than subsidy. The reason really is, let's suppose you're a miner.
I'm not.
All right. For sake of argument, you are.
He's a miner. He mines with a bid axe.
All right. You actually are a miner. And we'll say you're a really big miner. You can deny it for the sake of the IRS. But in my argument, you are. The problem is, let's suppose we have a block that has a ton of fees. What is your incentive to mine one more block on top of that versus to remine the same fees over again? If inflation security is a significant thing, the incentive is, well, you just go mine the next block because that's how you make the most money. You collect a bunch of money from the inflation subsidy. But if that's not true,
you want to fight over the block with more fees.
Yeah, if you have enough hashing power, it makes sense to fight over the fees and remine the blocks over and over again. On the other hand, you, a poor journalist,
yes, very
so
poor,
sad,
yeah.
with only 100
no
S19
IMDb
rates.
account.
None of this. All you have is one capped oil well with 16 S9s in a shed somewhere.
Sad.
And you're trying to solo mine. You will never go find 2 blocks in a row. Essentially never. The probability you find 2 blocks in a row.
My mining pool might, though, right?
Well, but that's a cache. If you point your hash at a small mining pool, you have a financial incentive to say, screw this, I'm going to point it at his mining pool. Because now you will earn more money. That is a very strong centralizing force. Now, that's not the only reason we have mining pool centralization, but that's a very strong version of it. And it's the sort of thing which can make situations really ugly if we wind up having to move away from big mining pools, because maybe the big mining pools are implementing sanctions or something.
Let me ask this again differently. So arbitrary data on Bitcoin can't be stopped. You argued that pretty eloquently. Is it good? Do we want it? Why do we want it? Why do we want it?
So I think this is where the arguments get a little incoherent.
Okay.
If you, like most of these sort of Luke Jr. types, think obviously Bitcoin fees should go pay for all security, why aren't you welcoming any usage that will pay fees?
Because I don't think they think that anymore, because the popular Bitcoin Twitter has eroded this idea that we need to replace the subsidy. Saifedean, Adam Back, they'll routinely talk about how we don't need to replace the subsidy.
But like, you got to replace the subsidy with fees. I mean, that's like there has
people
to be.
will just mine Bitcoin altruistically.
We'll yeah. Well, I mean, all right, there is that level. Well, actually,
how many people would love to mine Bitcoin for free without being paid for it? All right, we've got a couple people. He's mining right now. I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah.
He's got a little device over there.
So you remember the book Hash Wars or something? The crazy.
Do I remember the book Hash Wars?
Soft War. Yeah.
Oh, with Jason Lowery.
Yeah. Like that's argument. Well, governments will just do it for us. Well, I think it's a great argument. Governments will go mine for us. In fact, they could go sign blocks for us.
Yeah.
Well, we got to be careful there because Jason might go into the administration. I want to remind everybody that this is an open forum. If you have any questions, raise your hand. We're going to move into like a little bit of a Q&A here. We have one in the back here. Come on up.
Uh-oh.
Q&A. We've got Peter Todd here,
Jason himself.
Actor who played Satoshi Nakamoto on HBO.
Yeah. Discount Satoshi.
What are your thoughts on drive chains?
Oh, you really found the good one.
You're prioritizing short questions here.
Yeah. So
I was gonna ask.
I hope you've been following my Twitter account because I just came from a conference.
I was gonna ask a more direct question at the end. Are ordinals good? Do you like ordinals?
Neither.
Okay, you don't think they're good.
I mean,
let's go to drive chains
They're
first.
better than drive chains.
They're better than drive chains.
Yeah, you can quote me on that. Ordinals.
Don't you own a couple ordinals, correct?
Sort of by accident.
Right.
Because people have wanted to donate them, and I keep on giving the donation address in my open timestamps calendars.
But you just said that anything that pays fees should be welcome. That was an argument that you just made.
So I mean, I'm not actually making that argument necessarily. I am saying that is the argument.
So when you make an argument, you're not necessarily making.
But you guys,
by definition, something that's paying the transaction fee is not spam. Right. If it's a valid transaction and it pays a fee, it's not spam.
I don't think it's necessarily that simple.
You're so disagreeable.
But here's what I want to get across.
Especially after he's gotten some free burgers.
Yeah.
He's a really.
Hey, I haven't got any free food yet here. So, but what I want to go say is the argument that Bitcoin will be secure because of transaction fees should welcome things like ordinals because it's a very diverse set of things that could go.
So we
fees.
should welcome them, but you don't like them.
Well, I'm agnostic about them.
So like broccoli Rob or something. You don't want to eat it.
Look, you are not going to manage to go stop people doing this stuff. It is stupid to go and argue about it over and over and over again. And frankly, if Luke Jr. wasn't around, I don't think ordinals would have caught on. Because Inscriptions was designed to piss off Luke Jr. and get free advertising.
Right.
BRC20 pushed that to the next level of being technically really ridiculous in a way that really pissed off people like Luke Jr.
So you don't see these as heirs to the color coins?
Fuck no. RGB is far better technology.
Okay. I used RGB in Logano. It was pretty. It was very good.
Yeah, it's cool technology. Obviously, I'm biased because I kind of invented it, but. I invented the techniques. They actually wrote the code.
What is your full list of? Do you have a full list of inventions that you've made? Like
it's not very many. So actually, go to my blog post.
Have you invented anything that is unrelated to Bitcoin? Like it's just some.
Ooh, that's a great question. So I could go into 3-minute technical discussion about how gravity gradiometers work and how I made it work, but
right.
Yeah,
he's an inventor, right? So inventors should know what they have invented.
I had some very clever electronics design, my gravity gradiometers, but I don't think any of you care about that.
Interesting. All right, we got any more questions up here?
We still have that support drive chains
guy.
Like, yeah.
You
it obviously sucks. It's terrible, and why it is terrible is because it's a block size increase. Like that's your issue. If you want people to go and
do you want me to go in the crowd? I can walk in the crowd. Oh, you got it, Mike.
What's your favorite pizza topping? No, wait, don't answer that.
Do you have Hawaiian?
Since
my view on privacy. Well, if I want to be really clever, I should say my view on privacy is so private you don't know. But come on, obviously privacy's good.
Yeah.
Like why do we have a door on the bathroom? Like
he even asked me not to ask certain questions about him.
Yeah.
I did. That's how
I
private
did,
he is. Yeah. He was
because there's certain things I am putting a line in the sand on privacy. And one thing with privacy is it's also power. And I mean the main way is through L2s. Like that's the main thing that gets people privacy in Bitcoin, because Lightning inherently has a degree of privacy that's reasonably well against most adversaries. CoinJoin is another thing. And speaking of inventions, Greg Maxwell did ask me to come up with a name for it.
So you invented the name
Yeah,
of
I invented the name. I didn't come up with it. But it was
Can
it
you
was a good
invent a
name.
name? I feel like in marketing they call that branding. I
Yes.
feel like that's a different science. But
Most of the things I've invented is actually
are
me branding them.
Like proof of
But,
publication, right?
Oh,
That's,
yeah.
branding,
Yeah. No, and actually,
so you
Brooklyn
brand things in
Mountain-
ways that sound like science, but they're not.
Yeah. When you want Hop CTV. Yeah, do you have some money? If you want, so first of all, Jeremy Rubin, I think, really screwed this up. I don't think he's good at politics, and I think when he proposed Op CTV, it just wasn't useful enough. However, I am pretty sure that these days, someone with enough of a budget to go work on this for like 3 years could get that in. And the way they would get that in is by writing a lot of detailed analysis, is going to a lot of conferences.
I mean, he did
writing a lot of
right.
pops.
In all fairness,
No,
like
he didn't. He did
no.
not. His writing on CTV was shit. Like, it didn't argue the case for why we needed it, because we hadn't invented things like ARC yet. ARC is a much better argument
So
for
should he be
CTV.
penalized because his invention wasn't needed yet, even though it was a useful invention?
That is one problem he had, and the other problem was that in his BIP, the use cases for it just weren't that good. There are things like shifting fees around when it doesn't really necessarily save you money, can just cause problems later. Now, I'm not going to say that CTV is certainly coming in. I think a much better argument for CTV would be if the ARC guys implement their pre-signed transaction version and actually use it in production. But it is much more plausible now.
Ooh, those look good. What's that? Is that chicken fingers?
smells
What's
good.
that?
So,
Fish and chips. All right. Make sure you guys
know
go
what I'm
out there to
getting
the
next.
bar.
So-
we got next question over here.
yeah, right here.
We got
got
guy
it
in the
here.
bag. What price are we at first? You were the price guy,
It's
right?
it's still like 88.
So it's diving.
Yeah, 88-tastic.
Shit.
I mean, he probably just has a number he's just put on there. He's trying to keep
The,
everyone happy. It's probably going down like 60 by now.
So Thomas was telling me he actually keeps the price elevated up there so people spend more at the bar, right?
There
It's
you
not,
go.
It's not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's not accurate pricing.
It's
you gotta
actually in
double.
Canadian dollars.
You got to check your own. You got to check your own node. Make sure you're getting the right pricing there. Yeah.
So, in terms of who Satoshi is, since it's not you, who do you think it is? But you don't have to answer that.
Yeah, your best guess. That's a good one.
Which developer kind of influenced you the most?
The problem with the answer of who could be Satoshi is, I think there's probably on the order of like 1,000 to 10,000 people who it could be. That, when you look at the entire world, the people at the time with the right
A
skill
lot of people had
set-
hands. They had access to computers.
Well, so
They're really. Yeah, it's really.
well,
a
the
harsh
key
set,
thing
yeah.
is the cryptography in Bitcoin is not that sophisticated. You do not need to have really deep understanding of crypto to make Bitcoin. The game theory is not that sophisticated. It's very, very clever, but it's not sophisticated. And it's a type of invention which is just, it's very easy to understand. It's very difficult to be the guy who comes up with. The problem is the guy who comes up with is just like the one out of 10,000 people with the right skill set who just has that flash of inspiration.
Let me ask this question another way. Who in the Electric Money documentary do you think is most likely to be Satoshi?
Yeah, I mean, he told me, obviously,
Right,
so,
yeah. So you're a tides of history person. You're not a great man of history theory, right? Because there's two theories on history. There's does anybody know this?
Yeah, the whole great man.
I saw
that
some
was-
eye roll.
I
So you don't
mean,
think Satoshi was a great man of history? He's not an
Satoshi
Elon Musk.
was in the right place at the right time because a
Okay.
whole bunch of prerequisites were invented.
So he would have just Napoleon.
Hang on.
There would have been another emperor.
Hang on. So here's a really good example of this. Let's suppose hypothetically Bitcoin was created 10 years prior. Rather than being 2009, it was released 1999. Had that happened, SHA-256 would not have been invented at the time. Bitcoin probably would have used SHA-1, and SHA-1 got broken like a couple years later. And if you shipped Bitcoin that way, you would be in deep trouble. SHA-1 isn't quite broken enough that maybe it couldn't have worked at all, but it would be very, very ugly. And chances are, because there would be money attached SHA-1 would have been broken even further.
How do you feel about SHA-3? Are you pretty excited?
Well, so
about that?
SHA-3, so
I don't know
SHA-3
anything about SHA-3. So is this real? Is there a real?
Oh, so there's
SHA-3?
SHA-1, there's SHA-256, which is a huge number.
I just thought.
And
I
then
just
there's
threw that out
SHA-3,
there.
which is a little number.
Okay.
But somehow the 3 came after the 256.
See, that's part of it being a journalist. You can think of questions without even knowing
Yeah.
whether they're real or not.
And actually, to be honest,
you took that question
so-
very seriously too.
Yeah,
Like, you were just
well,
like-
I mean, gotta go up and down, all this. So, and actually, SHA-256 is actually just one of a category of hashing functions called SHA-2. So it really is SHA-1, SHA-2, SHA-3. But the interesting thing about SHA-3 is when the work to create it was started, the assumption was SHA-2 would break eventually just like SHA-1. Instead, what happened is it turns out SHA-2 is pretty good. And we tried really hard to go break the damn thing. I mean, it's been like a goal of so many academic cryptographers. And the research progressing to breaking SHA-2 just kind of petered out. And as far as I know, no one's really made
You
any
can stay with
progress.
us afterwards. We'll be talking about SHA-1 and 2 and 3 and the differences. That'll be an after-hours discussion. We'll get some more of Peter's time for that.
What's relevant to, I think, the Bitcoin question is there was this time when crypto was new enough that we weren't making good crypto. Algorithms kept on getting broken and so on. And that roughly ended somewhere in the 2000s.
Right.
So Bitcoin needed to be created somewhere after that to actually work. You know, if you'd created Bitcoin in 1990s, it would have been broken. 2000s, it's just early enough, it can go work. So, you know, in the great man theory, I mean, if Satoshi hadn't published in 2009, maybe someone else would have published in, 2010, 2011 or something. Because Bitcoin's just not that sophisticated.
Bitcoin,
On the other hand,
not that great.
you can also go say this about Elon Musk. Like, why
right.
can Elon Musk do like spaceships that go land?
Yeah.
Well, a really critical part is GPS, ring fiber gyros, much better, cheaper computers.
Right.
You know, it's like there's a bunch of sort of inventions you need to make this feasible. You could not make a self-landing rocket ship in the 50s because the computers aren't good enough, and you don't have GPS. And like gyros, go figure out where the hell the thing actually is, just are not that good.
What a bum. All right, we got any more questions? Let's see, we got a big lineup.
Uh-oh.
Let me ask a quick one. Did you learn all of this in art school? Yeah.
There you go.
Well, in high school, I took a computer science program as like specialty high school, which roughly speaking was equivalent to like maybe a year and a half, 2 years of a really shitty comp sci degree.
Canadian education is just that much.
This one school was pretty good. I was kind of like low down in that class. There were people a lot smarter than me. But I did wind up at a summer job as a programmer programming Perl. And I thought Perl was such a terrible language. I'm going to do art school instead. Yeah, Perl is terrible. And somehow I wound up actually in industrial design. Because, that sounds like engineering. And then I realized that's a pile of bogus bullshit. And then, well, if I'm going to do bogus bullshit, I should do arts. But then all my art was involving electronics stuff. So then eventually, some people I knew in the electronics world was like, yeah, you're actually pretty good at this. Why don't you go like make cables for a new startup? And then they had me making cables for the new geophysics startup. It's like, all right, you're actually really bad at that job because you get distracted. You should design electronics instead. And then I got that business. And then eventually I was like, well, analog electronics is cool, but I'm not smart enough to make interesting things. So why don't I do this new Bitcoin thing? Because Bitcoin's not as well established a field as analog electronics. And I can come in and swoop in and come up with a lot of good names using my art school degree. Yeah.
Hey, I have a question. Privacy is key. Just kidding.
I can't see who you are. Good privacy.
I was trying to hide and just voice
there
out
you
of
go.
nowhere.
Yeah.
Oh, you were going over the Bitcoin doomsday scenario of the transaction fee amounting to too high of a percent of the total reward.
Yes.
So, why wouldn't miners mine off of the highest proof of work? And then second, what would your solution to that be?
Well, the issue there is incentives just are not to go mine off highest proof work because you make more money remining an existing block. Like your only reward, like if transaction fees are the only significant reward, how do you go make money? Well, you mine transaction fees. But if transaction fees are already there,
So you're saying
you
it's
can
just
just
going to
remine
fork?
them.
It's just going to fork into 1,000 different forks of each
But
miner
that's
that
it.
mined
But that's it. It won't fork because the miners with the most hashing power, they're the ones likely to find 2 blocks in a row. And since they're likely to find 2 blocks in a row, naturally the hashers will go to the pools who can do this, and
Okay, I
quickly
see.
mining centralizes around a small number of pools. And how exactly this plays out is a little unpredictable, but it's really ugly. Now, the solution is to go back in time and tell me to not make that mistake. But, seriously, like Monero is an example. They recognized this as an issue, and for technical reasons, they also wanted perpetual mining reward. So they decided to switch to what they call tail emission. At the sort of the tail of a mission, there is a perpetual timing reward of however many Monero per block forever. And economically, this actually leads to a stable monetary supply. And the reason is because lost coins balances out the rates of new issuance. And this gets a little technical why. I mean, I have a blog post on this. But it winds up being zero monetary inflation. And essentially what's happening is the money that people lose to screw-ups, losing their coins, naturally gets redirected to mining security. Now, the other way you can go do this is with a security tax. You just directly say, hey, when you go spend a coin, you need to go pay for the security represented, and we even out that security across everyone. And you can implement this in a soft fork because you can add a new rule saying, yeah, when you spend a coin, money's got to go into this pot of money that all miners will get from. And if you pick a number like, 0.1%, well, 0.1% compounded over a human lifetime, it's like 5%.
What about the HODL fee? Wasn't that another?
Yeah, that's a term for it, like the HODL fee. I mean, it's just saying, yeah, let's go pay for the mining security in such a way that there's always money coming in for miners to mine new blocks. Now, obviously, transaction fees could get higher than this, in which case we have a problem. But you can at least set this enough that hopefully they don't. Also, you can say, hopefully enough money goes into this that 51% attackers won't just kill it. And how do you set that number? Well, you pick a number that's affordable. Like, why aren't you spending 0.1% of your Bitcoin to make sure the thing doesn't die? I mean, it is affordable, even if you're holding it over a whole lifetime. 0.5% I think is works to be 30% compounded over 55 years. You do the math on that. But these are the kinds of numbers that are affordable. Of course, Bitcoiners don't like taxes, but sometimes you need to pay for collective security. And currently we do pay for collective security.
Thank you, sir. We still got questions. We got a whole line. Oof. Okay.
Accelerators versus RBF.
We really hope people don't use accelerators much. And for the audience, so when he's talking about things like the mempool.space accelerator, where you can pay to a centralized third party, mempool.space, who then sends money to big mining pools to get transactions mined. And all of that process happens completely outside of the consensus. I mean, you literally pay with Lightning. And if people do this occasionally, so what? Who cares? But if this becomes a significant fraction of mining fee revenue, now we're in a circumstance where the small guy with a small mining pool, he can't realistically earn money from this. You, however, with your beautiful suit and Jack and all this, you are earning this money. Well, hash power will naturally go to the bigger pool who can earn this money. Now, RBF, replaced by fee, that is just the current way you are expected to adjust fees if they're too low. And if you can do that, it's a better thing to have. RBF is always the thing you want because it's the thing that any miner can benefit from.
All right. Who's got a fun question? 88,000.
Go around to Isaac.
How do you feel about $88,000 Bitcoin? Are you buying today? Did you buy Bitcoin today?
Well, keep in mind, all my income winds up coming in Bitcoin, so why would I ever go buy any? What would I buy it with?
I just want to follow up with the RBF you were just explaining. I know you've spoken about pitting attacks with RBF and stuff like that. Can you just touch on that for a minute?
Oh, yeah, this is where things get really technical. So for the less technical audience, so keep in mind, RBF, it's really like an auction system. I mean, mempools are an auction system, really. So, miners make blocks. They have block space. When you create a transaction, you're basically creating a bid. You're saying, hey, I am willing to pay for block space. Here's what I want to be in that block. Here is the fee I'm willing to pay. Now, RBF is just a way of updating your bid. You're saying, hey, that fee, all right, I'm willing to pay more. And now the miner has the option to get the higher fee. What transaction pinning is this thing we did. It took a long time for us to notice this because it's only really relevant in L2 protocols. Now, why is it relevant in L2 protocols? Because in an L2 protocol, if I have a Lightning channel with him,
Will never happen.
we can fix this. So get your laptop out. We can fix this. If I have a Lightning channel with him, I may be in a position where I need to react to him trying to take my money.
Very likely.
I mean, look at how shady he looks.
Yeah.
Well, if I need to react to him trying to take his money, I need to get a transaction mined in the blockchain. That means I need to get a transaction into mempools. Well, transaction pinning is sort of a class of attacks where he can prevent me from getting my transaction mined. Effectively, he's got
Sounds
a
great.
blocking transaction that prevents an output from being spent. And where RBF comes into this is there's a particularly nasty type of transaction pinning that's actually kind of hard to go fix called, it's like BIP 125 Rule 3 transaction pinning. It's a very technical thing, but the explanation is actually pretty simple. So imagine you have a cattle auction.
Yes, I was at a cattle auction the other day, actually.
Yeah, you've heard this explanation, I think.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. I rock up to my cattle auction with a really big cattle hat, and I go and bid. I want to go buy 10,000 cattle for $1 each. And I think the farmers in the audience are going to look at me and say, yeah, you're pretty stupid. No one is going to send you one cattle for $1. It's ridiculous. It's a stupidly low fee rate per cattle. The problem with Bitcoin Core is that if I try to update my bid by saying, you know what, yeah, that was stupid. I want to go bid, 2 cattle for $1,000 each. The first bid blocks the second bid. And in an L2 protocol, where we're collectively signing transactions, you could have been the guy making the first bid that's huge.
Very likely.
And then I try to make the second bid that's sane. But because he's made this first bid, Bitcoin Core nodes see that first bid and say, yeah, we're just going to let that one sit there.
Right, because we're sharing that transaction. Yeah, okay.
And the way to fix this, one way, is something I've been promoting called replace by fee rate, which says, well, obviously miners should look at the fee rate to decide what transaction to mine. Because certainly there are cases where a really big transaction is never really going to get mined. It should actually be replaced with a small one. The catch with that is, well, if you can make that big to small transition, you can use up a lot of peer-to-peer network bandwidth, right? Because you can broadcast really big transactions, replace them with really small ones, but only pay for the small amount. And that's not the end of the world, but a lot of Bitcoin Core people hate that idea. So they've come up with this other proposal called Truck, which just says, yeah, you're just not allowed to make bids on big transactions under certain cases. You can only have transactions that are up to 1,000 bytes in size. And you kind of opt into that, and it kind of works in certain cases in Lightning, but it's an incomplete solution. And that's the other thing Libra Relay does, is experiments with replace by fee rate.
Download today. Where can people find that?
GitHub.com /Peter Todd /Bitcoin. Click on the tree thing, go to Libra Relay, look at the 28.1, notice there's no docs because I haven't written them yet. This isn't a mass market thing yet. One day.
All right. What do we got? We got any more questions back there? We're running out. Going once, going twice. Peter Todd. Maybe Satoshi.
Oh, I got one. So I came in a few minutes late, so stop me if this has been spoke of already. But on the topic of, I think it was RBF and being commissioned by John Dillon, did this come up already?
No.
Okay.
No, we do in reality.
We ignored that part of the HBO documentary. So that was kind of hilarious because, this is
that's a whole rabbit hole.
This whole rabbit hole of some dude who way back in the day
paid Peter Todd to FUD.
Yeah,
and
FUD
he got
Bitcoin.
everybody to believe it.
But I mean, when you get down to it, what actually happened concretely there? Some dude wants to go pay me $500 to make the first RBF implementation. And people like Roger Ver, who think RBF is the devil, have been going on to rabbit hole conspiracies
Well,
about how that was like the U.S. government trying to go kill
Well,
Bitcoin.
because the extra thing is that the email chain leaked.
Yes.
And in the email chain, we learned that John Dillon is a government agent, and that he
Although-
was colluding with Peter Todd.
Although, what
this
the
was
guy
not
had
John
told me
Dilley.
was like he was involved in intelligence. But the thing is, especially a few years back, like there's a lot of people involved in intelligence. Chances are his day job was to go review like surveillance footage of like goat herders in Afghanistan
But
and
you
try
don't,
to
you
figure out
don't
which
think
ones
it's
were terrorists.
suspicious that you are working with a government agent?
You can get better examples of that, actually. I mean, in my previous line of work, like oil and gas attracts all kinds of weirdos, including people involved in government. I mean, one of my coworkers was, in fact, former intelligence agency in, I believe it was South Africa.
I think your most heretical trait is that you want arguments to be judged on merit. I think that's
it's
that's
terrible.
probably
Yeah. No, we should obviously always judge arguments based on hats. And look right there,
Yeah, hey.
wins.
Well, I don't think anyone is having fun staying poor today. We're having a good time, right?
Yeah.
All right. Is this a wrap? Is this the end? Peter Todd, Q&A.
Hey, I want to try
Go
the
get
food.
some burgers. Thanks,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for coming out. Happy
Peter
all-time
Todd.
highs. Want to give a thanks to PubKey.
Thank
And, yeah, just enjoy. Happy all-time highs. We'll see you at the next. We're doing more of these Bitcoin history sessions. I got one coming up on November 21st. We're going to have Jameson Lopp out here with Patrick Merck. This is an oldie but a goodie from the Bitcoin Foundation days. We got a little clap there. But Pete Rizzo, you can find me on Twitter, the Bitcoin Historian. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Tip your bartenders. Shake Peter Todd's hand. Take a picture. $5. Picture with Peter Todd.